Welcome to the Thinklings podcast, a conversation where good thoughts help renew the mind with the Word of God. I'm Charlie Carter, and I'm here with Tim Little and Andy Stearns. Let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to the Thinklings podcast, episode 61.
I just looked it up. It is 61.
61. And we have a guest with us today for Books and Business, friend of the program, Dr. Josh Boyd.
Also known as Puddleglum in some quarters.
I like that name, Puddleglum.
How are you known as Puddleglum?
Oh, my disposition, my demeanor.
It's just so you're
I've been listening to the Silver Chair on the way to work, and I find that he's a soul with which I have much in common, Puddleglum.
My brother-in-law, Danny Capon, has been called Puddleglum. He fits that persona as well.
He's
Capon
one of my favorite characters in the Narnia sphere. I think Reapy Cheap is number one, and then Puddleglum for me is number two. I don't know. But, I mean, we could get into a Narnia ranking character contest
no, that's
here.
okay. My son Josiah really likes Puddleglum as well. He wanted to
I
get
knew
a
Tim
mug,
would be the one that...
a mug with Puddleglum on him.
There you go. So...
That would be an awesome mug.
Do we have any announcements?
Merry Christmas.
It's
Happy
coming.
New Year.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's just jump into the Thinklings business then.
Oh, this is where I say books and business.
It is where you say books
How
and
did
business.
how did you not know what's going on there, Tim?
Just
Come
had a
on,
brain
man.
fart.
And then after you say books and business, I say let's talk about some books.
Oh, so now you can.
And I will start. I will start first. And I'm glad we have Dr. Boyd, Dr. Puddleglum here, because this book was sort of a recommendation from him.
I'm glad that you said you will start first.
I will start first. Man, you know, if you're around me long enough, you're going to find me to have many, many dangling modifiers and such atrocities.
You just roll your eyes. That's all.
Yeah.
Josh,
What was it?
we basically just make word salads on this show, just so you know that.
To that I say, let us leave.
Oh, nice.
You
Which
got a
leads
nice
us
out of
to
Tim.
the author of the book, which is Leaf.
I thought it was Leif.
It is, how do we pronounce his name?
Leif Unger.
Leif Unger. And it's French, Dr. Boyd informed me.
Well, no, I just was talking about how to pronounce the EN. I don't know what his...
It's not French. If you're listening to this, Leif...
Mr. Unger.
Mr. Hit us up.
Is it Mr. or Doctor?
Just Mr.
Puddleglum. Anyway, so the book is Peace Like a River. I think I mentioned it last week, right? Yes?
Yes.
And I've made a substantial dent into the book. And I would say at this point, I don't want to give any spoils away. I would definitely say you need to go read it. What I really like about the book, I don't know how to describe it, but just it captures a sense of a story so well, and it draws you in its descriptions of things. And there's so many little phrases that you go back and read again, and you're like, ooh, that was an interesting way to say that. And there's really great character development. And then I'm just being super vague here because I'm not giving anything away. Something happens in the course of this family's life together. It's a dad, two sons, and a daughter. And something happens to one of the sons, and then that's kind of the track of the rest of the story. And it also has this like Western like adventure to it, which I don't know how to explain that without giving things away. But Dr. Boyd is one of the people that has recommended this to me. And so give me your sense of the book. Like, what do you think is its value? I mean, I've once I started reading, it's like I can't put it down.
Yeah, it's a beautifully written novel. And Leif Unger, by his own admission, labors over his works. I think he publishes, books every 4 or 5 years. I think he was working on that particular novel for maybe 5 years, something like that. But the family is just drawn so fully, and they're so such an attractive family in terms of the relationship that the father has with his children and the love that they have for one another, which is something that's tested in the novel. But yeah, beautifully written, hilarious. It has a lot of Mark Twain sensibilities to it in the humor, particularly the narrator, Reuben, and some of the experiences. So yeah, I don't want to give too much away either, but it's an excellent novel.
Yeah. So as you're thinking about the story, there's something that happens right away that kind of perks your theological ears. I would say that so far, if I was to take a spiritual, I think it's pretty low hanging fruit. This Andy's over here pouring a cup of coffee, and it's just like enticing me. But no, I'm good.
I'll take it.
Okay. Sorry about the mic.
Yikes. They'll love hearing that. So low-hanging fruit from the book. Right away, the narrator, Reuben, who's the younger of the two sons, starts describing his dad as someone who can do miracles. And then as he describes his dad throughout the book, there is this emphasis on his prayer life, which it's interesting how it's brought up and different contexts of doing miracles and praying for certain things. And it reminded me, like, man, you need to pray more. Like, it definitely hit me with, and I think that's low hanging fruit. Like, oh, this character does that thing, and I want to do that thing. And it's not. Sometimes when you read books, you don't need to go all censor plentier and like try to find this deeper meaning. Like sometimes they're there. Like there's deeper themes and ebbs and flows that you connect over time. Like we were talking about one just before we started recording about there's some, I'll just say, courtship going on in the book with different characters and how they're put next to each other, and one of them is in a very virtuous sense and one of them is not. And I think you're intended to maybe think about that. But, there's deeper themes like that. And then there's like, you like this character and he prays a lot. So, but that would be my, like, so far, like my big takeaway is like, man, I do love how he paints the father of the family as a man of faith. And I don't know, but.
And I would just quickly add to that, it's the father's faith and the way that he goes about things that is a frustration to Reuben, particularly early in the novel, where he wants his father to act and his brother does act, and that's what brings about some of the tension. So it's really beautifully laid out, and the father is a very honorable, attractive character.
And then the daughter is a budding author herself, and she just does some really funny things. And I don't want to give away but there's a particular scene where she does something to somebody's car, and when you realize what has happened, she pretty much like sabotages this person's car by putting something in the gas tank. And I mean, that's probably going to give something away. If someone goes and reads it, you'll put the pieces together. But once that is revealed, it's like, oh man, that was a fun moment. But yeah, so great book. I'm probably going to finish it probably tonight or tomorrow. It's just I'm at work and all I want to do is just like go home and read this book. And so that's a good sign. I think I can't remember what I said last week, but it's firmly in like the 4, 5, 6 range. It is really well written. It's just the descriptions of what's going on. I wish I could just like keep track of the phrases that jump out to me, and like you go back and you read them again, and it's just they're crafted so well. But anyway, so yeah, Peace Like a River by Leif Unger.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Well, I am going to talk briefly about a book that I picked up. I've had it for quite some time, but I picked it up just this weekend because I'm wanting to refresh a little bit on poetry. But it's Literature, A Student's Guide, written by Louis Marcos, who teaches down at Houston Baptist University. He teaches in the English department, the honors school. He is a classicist by training, I believe. And so he has several books that are helpful for Christians as you think about reading some of those pagan classics, the Odyssey, the Iliad, Sophocles, so forth. But this guide in particular, it's called Literature, A Student's Guide, but he makes the admission early on in the book that it's really about poetry. And that's what he's going to spend his time describing. So he has a chapter on kind of the rhythm of poetry, the figurative language of poetry. And then he has a survey of great poets and poetry that people should read. And then he interacts with some of the criticism, modern and postmodern criticism, and some of the reasons they come to their conclusions and so forth. It's a really helpful little guide, and I'd encourage you to pick it up.
Does he go through like figures of speech?
He does. Yep.
Explaining like metaphor, metonymy, synecdoche, all that stuff?
Yes.
I've been looking for a smaller book because mine is, I haven't found like something that It's a small little book. That might work pretty well, actually.
Yeah, it's surprisingly thorough, I think, for being such a short book.
Yeah.
But the chapter on rhythm and rhyme goes through some of the kind of main structures of poetry in terms of the rhythm and how poets use rhythm and meter, and then the figurative language chapter has all those those figurative techniques that you mentioned.
I have my Hebrew Exegesis 2 class where we go through Hebrew poetry. The rhythm and rhyme section would be pretty worthless. But the figures of speech, a lot of students, they just don't understand similes, metaphors, metonymy, synecdoche. So having like a concise guide. I've actually talked about how I use Zuck,
Yeah.
basic Bible interpretation. A lot of times he's got like 40 pages in there. Okay. But this could be a nice addition. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. The other thing I want to mention quickly, shameless plug, for the Fundamental Lit Forum. It's a little discussion guide on the great books that we're starting here on campus in the spring. So if you're local and you're a listener, you can join us. We'll send out more information in terms of time when we're gathering. But the book that we're using is a reader called The Great Books Reader, and it's edited by John Mark Reynolds. It has brief introductory essays, and then after each little excerpt from a great book, it has a reflective essay as well. Obviously, ideally, we would read the great books themselves, but we can't do that for sake of time. So maybe this will be something that would whet the appetite of our attendees to actually pick up the full works and read them at some point.
Well, first of all, Josh, I just want to say that you don't have to be shameless about your plug here. Just be completely unshamed. Like, this is what we want. And then secondly, so could you tell for the listeners what's a great book? And then why would you want to read them? Could you maybe do that in like 2 minutes or more?
Sure, yeah. Well, the great books are the works of literature and philosophy and theology in the Western tradition that have kind of been agreed upon as the works upon which our culture rests. Obviously, in an anthology like this, there are some that are going to be left out. But to give you some examples, we're talking about some of those Greek epics that I've mentioned before, the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Roman epic, the Aeneid, works like The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius, John Milton's Paradise Lost, Dante's The Divine Comedy, and then Shakespeare, and the list goes on and on. But those are the great books. There's actually a whole program, the Great Books Discussion Program, that's founded on these great books as well. Harvard has their collection of great books, which is very similar to the Harvard Classics. So these are works that are part of a classic education, the education that our forefathers all had as a foundation in their schooling. So yeah, we want to just make sure that we're trying to present this material to our students as well. And one thing I find interesting about it is there's a sense in which when students read a great book, they know it and they invest in it because they understand that it's important and it's saying things that are important. And I've had conversations with you, Andy, where you've encountered something and then you've encountered it in a great book and you've realized, oh, that's what maybe C.S. Lewis or whoever was actually interacting with. That's the idea that's being presented there. So that's part of it, that just being well-rounded in one's education is having that foundation.
It's intriguing because most of the early authors that I can think of off just going off the table of contents are authors we don't talk about every single one of them in detail, but they all get mentioned in Western Civ. And I never saw that connection. So I think I'm very excited about that. So I'll definitely be attending whenever I'm able.
Yeah, if you want to go and, as we're talking about reading great books, here's a YouTube video. Jordan Peterson, the 12 steps thing for I can't remember what the name of his book is, but he's got a YouTube video from a few years ago where he and another guy are discussing what is a classic, and his definition, or just the way he words it in that video, is really helpful. He's like, it's a work that has disproportionately stimulated other great works. And then I don't buy into a lot of Peterson's philosophy on life, but he then says, so the classic is the Bible because it has stimulated more other great works than anything else. And so you really, we don't really think about the Bible as a literature classic, but it is by that definition. And all of the guys in this Great Books Reader are interacting with ideas that either directly or indirectly intersect into the themes of Scripture, especially in a wisdom philosophical vein. And so that I would go look up that video, and that might send you down a rabbit trail of like, oh, these are books I should read. Because then from there, it's like, what books should people be reading? And then there's all these other YouTubers are like, read these books, and some of those videos are helpful, and some of them are just straight trash. But so, and then there's an anecdote on that note. I was at a Christmas party on Friday night.
Look at that. He makes that statement and just boom, right into his anecdote.
And well, here's the thing. So there's a white elephant gift exchange. And one of the white elephant gifts was the Theban plays. Did I say that correctly? By Sophocles, which Dr. Boyd has mentioned on this podcast. And then it was a like anniversary edition of The Horse and His Boy, a C.S. Lewis book. And the reason that it was white elephanted was because the person who got them as a gift had already owned them. So it was like a re-gift because they already owned the books. But I'm sitting there in this group of like 20 people, and I'm like, you have the option to steal. And I'm pretty sure in this group of 20 or 25 people, and you know, they'll listen to this and they'll know I'm talking about them. So fine. But of that group, there's maybe one person who's actually read Sophocles, like these great classics. And I'm pondering as we go around the circle, I'm like, someone is considering stealing a cast iron pan. And there's these books sitting there and nobody wants them. And I'm like, this is right in line. Pun intended, it's a tragedy. And I just love the laugh I'm getting. And so it got to me, and I'm like, give me the books. Like I already have Horse and His Boy. So if anyone listening to this wants a free range copy, free range as it's not in with the other ones.
Is it grass fed?
Yeah, it is.
Gluten free?
Yikes. It's the least Moses could do. Anyway.
Horrendous.
But so if you'd want a copy of, normally you would buy the Narnia books together as a set, so you have all of them. If anyone out there wants
bookstore.
At the Faith Bookstore. If anyone wants just a copy of A Horse and His Boy, I have one that I will give to you. Just come to my office at the Domicos building at the school.
Should do a giveaway on the podcast again and give it
Oh
away.
yeah, we should.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, first person to go on social media and post a picture of themselves with like the expression on their face is, man, I want this book so badly. You have to like it's the best face wins. That's what I'm trying to say. Like you tag Thinklings and you're like, I want the Horse and His Boy book. Best one will win. There's the contest.
Or like, I want the Horse and the Boy book this bad.
Yeah,
that's
you're
it.
like,
You gotta show us that in a picture with your face.
Boom. And so I'll give that one away. But I didn't have the Theban plays, and so I'm like, man, these are classics, and it's like nobody in this room is valuing this. Like, it's even the fact that it's like, I understand why it was given as a white elephant gift, but even the fact that it is present at a white elephant gift is like, I'm just sitting there like, this is like, I wanted to like defend them. I wanted to be like, but also at this white elephant, and then with this, we'll be done with my tirade. Someone as a white elephant gift gave live goldfish.
What?
Like they went to Petco and got a bag with little goldfish in it and put it in a bag. And so someone opened, and the gift was a can of like fish food, and then this like plastic baggie with live goldfish, and no bowl, no anything, just like, here's a bag with fish and fish food. I thought that was hilarious. And then so that was probably the best white elephant gift I think I've ever seen.
That's impressive.
And
they probably didn't live long.
I have on good authority that they were relocated to a pond that is currently located near us on this campus. I have a video on my phone of someone relocating these free-range goldfish.
That's awesome.
No,
the water doesn't.
The water's
freeze
great
all the
over
way
there.
down.
It's so clean.
Oh my word.
Those goldfish are going to grow fat and happy and be theologically correct.
That's right.
Anyway.
So for my books and business, I want to start off by saying one of our listeners came up to me this week and expressed their sincere condolences after hearing you and I talk about the Hawkeye game where we got destroyed. And now he was an Iowa State fan, but Ethan Wilson, thank you for your sentiment. I appreciate that you listen to the podcast. But he was honestly
it sincere?
Sad. It was sincere.
Was it sincere?
Yeah. No, he was definitely sincere.
I don't believe it.
No, it was.
I don't know. What's his name?
Ethan Wilson. He's
Ethan?
a completely...
Who do you think you are?
What? He was
Ethan.
he was He loves our podcast. He was being sincere. Okay, maybe he was a little, I don't know. Maybe he's a little joke.
He is an Iowa State fan.
He is. I do think
They can't be trusted.
Okay. All right.
Yes, they can. Andrew Gogarty is a beloved friend, and he's an Iowa State fan.
And Dr. Doug.
Well, okay.
I don't care about either
All right,
team.
quick. Let's move on.
He's a beloved friend, too. Yeah.
Okay, so for my books and business week, not sports updates. So I have finished Wingfeather book 4. And I will just say, if you haven't read these, you should read them. They're excellent. The ending was not, like I saw some things coming. Some things happened that I thought would happen, just not the way I thought they would happen. And other things I had literally no idea what was going to happen. It was excellent. So, and I will just warn you, brought me to tears. Big, manly, theological tears. Okay, I'm just going to say that.
Okay, a couple of questions, and we can't spoil it
No spoiling.
because Dr. Boyd informed us that he has now started the Wingfeather saga.
Oh, this is so
So we
good.
don't give anything away.
Okay, no, not even a little nugget of anything away.
No nuggets. Okay. Picked up on that one right away. Okay. So
You guys are so horrendous.
for me, I thought the bigger of the two, we'll say climactic reveals of the full story, and one of them corresponds to book 3, one of them corresponds to book 4. I thought the one in book 3 was, I think, a little bit more. I thought the lead up and the reveal of that one was a little bit more. Was more superior. More. There we go again.
Word salad.
I just need Dr. Boyd sitting here on my shoulder, always making me think about what I'm saying. It's superior to the way he does it in book 4, because I think book 4 you kind of see it coming quite a way off, and you don't see the end of book 3 until boom, there it is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it was completely unexpected.
Yeah. What?
So you had mentioned to me that you thought 3, I don't know, 3 had a bigger impact, or 3 was...
I thought I feel like the story was being told in books 1, 2, and 3, and then book 4 he was trying to tell me the end of the story, like not telling the
Interesting.
story, just
Okay.
he's ending his story.
I thought book 3 was more emotional.
So I don't know if it's a classic case of it being built up in my head differently because I knew this from you. I'm not sure. So like,
I oversold it.
well, no, I don't know that it would say that, but like, so when the original prequels of Star Wars came out,
You
like
did
episode
oversell
1,
it.
2, and 3, and everyone's trashing them, I didn't see them right away. And then when I finally saw them, I thought they were okay. But I think it's because I had such low expectations. So I'm trying to in my head think, was I expecting something bigger? But I think because I knew to expect something, I was like, my mind was thinking of what it might be. And then when the thing happened, I remember thinking like, huh? Like literally, like there was no like emotion. It was like, wait, what? The whole time I was just confused. And so it wasn't emotional at first. And then it took, I don't know, quite a bit of the telling of that part of it for me to go, oh, and then I was like, it was amazing. And the like the stuff that I can't talk about to give it away. So I don't know if that's it, but I really liked 4, and I liked 4. Not if I say better, it makes it sound like 3 is bad. It's not. I 4 was awesome. It was like 3 was really, really good too. I would say it's awesome too.
Yeah, I'm not dogging book 4 either.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because the moment I got done with book 4, my first thought was, I need to read these again, like all of them. And so, again, so what's interesting, as we mentioned, Leif Unger. So, what is the? Oh man, I should have brought the book with me. There's a female character in what's the girl's name in the hometown that Reuben is fancy towards? Do you remember her name? Something Orchard. Is it Sarah Orchard? Or something like that?
That might be right.
Because then there's a character in Wingfeather.
Oh, it's like Sarah Cobbler.
It's something. There's Sarah Cobbler. I don't think it's Sarah. It's something like that. But I was reading it and I was like, I just wonder if the author of Wingfeather had been like, here's Sarah Cobbler, and then the other one was something Orchard, and it's both like a love interest of the main character, which is a young boy, and I'm just like, and there's not, there's not thousands of stories. There's like 3, and they're all just that same arc is told in many different ways. But I was reading it and I was like, man, that is like almost the same thing. And I would just be really curious if good old AP had read Peace Like a River. I'm sure he has. I think it's actually mentioned in Adorning the Dark.
Adorning the Dark.
Yeah.
I would say the other thing about the Wingfeather series, I want to, like you said, you want to read them again. And without you saying that, like you didn't like sell that. And I really totally agree with you. I think there's, this is the kind of book I could go back to a couple of times and keep pulling stuff. And the other thing I would say is I don't know that I would draw any of my theology from it. Okay. So you don't want to go to a fiction book and draw theology direct. But it's interesting the way some deep theological truths were illustrated in a way where my heart wanted them, desired them. Like a good thing was presented as good, and I want that good thing. And I thought he did really well with that. And so the idea of like it tuning your soul a little bit, or like, I think we talked about this. I can't remember the words we were using. But anyways, I would say it does something inside of you that's good. And there are other ones where, you know, like Harry Potter was a really cool story, and there were some good things in it. But this one was showing good things as good so that I wanted the good things. And I thought it was very noticeable. And there's a lot of echoes of theology all throughout. So I would love to go back and just pull out theological tidbits.
Having finished the series, throw it on the scale.
I'm having a hard time.
Tim, what's your book?
Having a hard time not giving it a 10.
Oof.
But I don't think I've ever given it a 10, so I'll give it a 9.
Yeah.
I'll give it a 9. Maybe an 8. It is
8 or
like
9.
8 or 9. I would say 8 or 9. What would you give it, Charlie?
It's fiction. It's still fiction.
I think with what it is aimed, so like understanding what it's intended to be is really helpful.
Yeah.
So think about like Narnia, for example. It is a children's series.
That's a good point.
And it captures in a story for children an incredible depth of desire and theology.
Yep.
And I think Wingfeather does the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But so in that genre of like Narnia, you know, Christian fiction, like, you know, no, I'm not going to qualify it. Yeah. But in that vein, it's really good. But
it's really good.
I don't think it captures Narnia-esque vibes, but it's the closest thing I've ever experienced to that.
Yeah.
After reading a series.
Have you read the Ember series?
I have not.
So I would put the Ember series up there also.
I would say this is, you should own it. You should go to Faith Bookstore right now and buy the box set of Andrew Peterson's Wingfeather Saga for $44.99.
I really enjoyed it. I would say I really enjoyed it, and you should.
And we were not paid to say that.
No, we were not.
We don't get paid anything.
Friend of the program, but we were not. There's no stake in the game. And maybe, hopefully, you use that code that we gave you for Thanksgiving to get one.
Yeah, that's expired.
Yeah, it is. I know. Anyway, Tim, we're going way too long. Tim,
yeah, you are. So the book I have won't take long. It's called The Flirtation Experiment by Lisa Jacobson and Felicia Masonheimer. I don't know how to say those names exactly, but there we go.
Your books are always that's all I'm going to say. They're just awesome.
So I've been trying to study flirting a little bit. You have flirting in the Song of Songs. What's so funny? You do have flirting in the Song of Songs.
I'm laughing at Andy, who's laughing.
Okay, sure.
Sorry, you just said that you're studying flirting and no one's making a joke. That's all. I'm going to go back to muting my mic.
So in Song of Songs, chapter 2, you have this, it's in chapter 1 and chapter 2, you have this dialogue between the two lovers. And the message is that they're flirting. They're talking back and forth to one another. And they're flirting with one another. And it's awakening. And so then at the end of the entire section, you have the adjuration refrain, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the does of the field, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. So you're not supposed to awaken love until a specific time. And then how were they awakening love right before that? By flirting. Okay?
That's really good. Wow. That's really good.
Anyway, that's one of the points that I'm making in my Song of Songs for Singles book. But within this book, The Flirtation Experiment, which it's directed towards married couples, so that be Song of Songs material, exactly Song 1 and 2, the flirtation experiment, putting magic, mystery, and spark into your everyday marriage. But it just illustrates how people make assumptions about the Word of God that it doesn't have anything to say, okay, about things like flirting. And they actually talk about flirting in their single years and how it was looked down upon and you weren't supposed to do it. And they're like, well, why? What was wrong with this? And we don't see any problem with this. Trying to find the spot. I lost it. Here it is. Once I started dating, these regulations on flirting became a heavy burden to bear. I debated whether I could show interest, and if so, how much. So they're making a difference, or they're making an equation between two things, flirting and showing interest. And they're saying that's the same thing. Okay, I would say that those are two different things. Where was the line for a godly woman who just plain liked a guy? As I dug deeper into the word, I couldn't find a solid case against flirtation when it was expressed to a person you generally wanted to date. See, so our ignorance of the revelation of God's word, specifically the Song of Songs, which would say, hey, guess what? Okay, there are limitations on flirting, and it's right here in Song 1, and then in 2:7, you're not supposed to awaken love. Flirting is awakening. Okay, so they're completely oblivious to actually the instruction from God's word. So the book that I have is The Flirtation Experiment, Putting Magic, Mystery, and Spark into Your Everyday Marriage. And this is just a little exegetical, practical nugget that will hopefully incorporate its way into our book. I'm hopeful of the book. I think it could be a good book, but I haven't gotten very far in it yet.
Okay. So by the way, we got a, I can't remember if it was a Facebook message, Instagram. I think it was Instagram. Jill Blanc wrote in and said that we should typecast a character, a name for books that are bad that we don't want to read. Like, we have this goodness list, but where do we put the books that we don't think you should read? They're bad books. We should come up with like an evil name for them. And like, oh, that book's on the whatever list, or it's a, like we were talking about Dyson earlier. Like, that's a Dyson. Man, I don't know anything about Hugo Dyson. I should be careful, but.
That would work. I was just going to say something about you could put it in the shack.
Oh. That book goes in the shack.
Have you guys read The Shack?
No, just a lot of reviews about how terrible it is.
I purchased it like in my, like, literally probably in the first year or two of Christianity.
Yeah.
And read like a chapter or two, and it's not a good story. It didn't capture,
Yeah.
And then I, after having it on the shelf for a while, when you have Shack on the shelf, and then,
horrendous.
I realized what it was, maybe like not great, like its depiction of who God is and some things like that. I just heard some of the ramble, and so then I never finished it. I was like, this isn't worth my time. So I shacked the Shack, we might say.
I think I've got a copy still because I felt that I needed to read it, but
we should call it the Shack Stack.
The Shack
That book's
Stack.
on the Shack Stack.
I like that.
It's not bad, but I think we should read The Shack first. At least one of us.
Well, wouldn't the Shack Stack, by the virtue of the name Shack Stack, be on the Shack Stack? Like all the other Shack Stack books are on top of the Shack in the same stack?
I'm done.
So I haven't read it, but I know a couple of people who have, and I've talked to them about it. So I'd be happy to read it sometime.
Maybe we should call him like Shaquille O'Neal or something like that. Like, that's the name.
It's funny because we're talking about the Shack, the book, but you kept saying the Shack Stack. And you know that gif of him where he like eats a hot wing and he's like, ooh, ooh, that's heresy, or something like that.
Anyway, so here's what's in this episode. This is part 2 of the Shrewd Steward from Luke 15. And we had the first part a while back. And so we just talk more about that passage and what it means and all that stuff. And so enjoy that. And thanks for listening. And we will see you next week with is next week the Christmas episode?
I will check. I'm pretty sure it is.
I think it is.
I think it's this.
Next week.
Let's have part 2 of our conversation on the Shrewd Steward from Luke 16.
Woo, woo.
Woo, woo. Really quickly. Let's just review.
That was the caffeine talking.
Ladies and gentlemen, caffeinated
we
Tim
have
is one of the
vibed
best
quite
things
a bit this morning on the coffee.
I've ever seen.
Okay, so Luke 16, there's a parable, and the main characters are someone who's really rich. He has a lot of money. He has a steward who's keeping his money. And then there are people that benefit from the dishonest but shrewd actions of the manager when he gets fired. We're going to get into that in a moment. But the backdrop of this, remember we looked at this in the previous episode, all throughout the book of Luke, there are these interactions with Jesus and sinners, and the Pharisees are just there as this like side character, and they always get upset about Jesus forgiving sinners, eating with sinners, and it's because they're the righteous ones. And if Jesus is really the teacher from God, the Son of God, which I didn't like him being the Son of God. They thought that was blasphemous. But if he's really that guy, why in the world does he interact with sinners like this? Why does he forgive sinners like that? Why does he eat with them? Why does he let them touch him? They hated it because they thought they were very righteous, and they thought these people are way sinful. There's no way these people are getting into the kingdom. And the whole point is, well, no, if you believe and repent, you're in. So with that in mind, the backdrop of those interactions with the Pharisees, go back to Luke 16, and let's walk down through the story. So again, rich man gives all of his riches to this steward to manage. He hears, verse 1 and 2, that this guy's not doing a good job, and he's like, I'm firing him. Calls him into the office, like, you're done, buddy. Turn in your books. This guy, the manager, knows, I've lost my job. I have to figure out how I'm going to provide for myself. He starts thinking about his future. And what does he do in verse 5 and 6? He calls the master's debtors. He says, hey, how much do you owe? And the first one says, I owe 100 measures of oil. Really quickly, this is an exorbitant amount of oil. The term for measures is a batos, and I just like a bath. Think about like a bath of oil. Fill up a bathtub with like 10 gallons of oil 100 times. Think about how much oil that would be.
Goodness.
It's a huge amount of wealth. He's like, oh, you owe 100? No. Sit down and write 50. So this is a really good deal for the debtor and the manager, but not the rich man. Why? So when the manager gets fired and he's hungry, guess who he can go to? Hey, Mr. Oil Man, remember when I saved you on 50 measures of oil? You think you could give me a plate of food tonight? Maybe give me a place to sleep? Does the same thing in verse 7. The guy owes 100 measures of wheat. He says, take your bill, write 80. It's doing the same thing. Now, some commentators get caught up on the difference between going from 50 to 80. Like, why does one go to 100 to 50, 180? It's that these two commodities would have had different market values. We don't know what they were, but the principle is the same. He's being very shrewd. He's thinking about his future. That's what the word means, to think carefully about what's going to happen when he's fired. In an earthly way, he is securing for himself friends so that when he doesn't have a job, he doesn't have income, these debtors are going to give him things. They're going to be nice to him because of what he did for them. Now, verse 8, it's very clear what the guy is doing is wrong. He's a dishonest manager, and the master probably isn't happy about how he's losing money on this, but the master commends him for what? The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. Okay, so what's going on in verse 8 and 9? Really quick. The man in the story, the manager, is the parallel to the sons of this world. The sinners, the ones that are always doing the wrong things. They're unrighteous, they're dishonest, and even that man knows to make a decision that impacts his future. Do you remember the deferred marshmallow test we talked about last episode? He understands I need to do something now to secure the future. 2 marshmallows later is better than 1 marshmallow now. So let's secure, some meals in the future. He says the sons of this world, the sinners, know to do that. They're shrewd as they deal with other people in this world. But the sons of light aren't. Now, it's really easy to Christianize this right away. And I do think that there are some applications to the church, to Christians, with the term the sons of light. But I think, given the backdrop of the Pharisees, that is a broad reference to Israel, and that there are people, God's children, the nation of Israel, who aren't thinking about their future. Like, what are you talking about? He says in verse 9, you need to use your wealth to make friends, just like the man in the story, but instead of an earthly dwelling, you're using your unrighteous wealth to secure what? An eternal dwelling. He talks about being a faithful steward. He talks about being faithful in the unrighteous wealth so you can have true riches, eternal riches. And then really the heart of it, if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So the point of the parable isn't this is how you use your money with earthly friends. It's no, you need to use your money in a way that secures not an earthly thing, but an eternal, heavenly thing.
Mm-hmm.
So how would one do that? Think about Old Testament context. Think about this story with the people listening. The end of verse 13 tells you, you need to not love money. That's how you use your money to secure eternal dwelling. You don't love it, you love God. Then verse 14. But the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, are what? They hear this and they're like, what? No, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I think the primary application, just like the end of chapter 15, is pointing directly at the self-righteous Pharisee. You think you're getting into the kingdom, but you actually love money. You are not using your unrighteous wealth to secure an eternal dwelling. You're thinking about this life now, and you're not thinking about later, and it's demonstrated in the way that you're loving money. And he says that in verse 15. You think that you justify yourselves in a way that God hates. Verse 16, you think you can force your way into the kingdom, but you can't, because you can't serve God and money. So I think that's the big point of it. It draws out the self-righteousness of the love of money in the Pharisees. But now I'm going to kick it to you guys. So if there's a parable directed to the Pharisees, how do we apply it? And this is where getting across that bridge from Luke writing this to Theophilus, but recording a parable that really points out the unrighteousness of the Pharisees, how would I, bring this to modern context?
Well, if I had to take a shot at it, I would say this. I think you're right. I like your explanation. I am convinced by what you've said. I think he is aiming at the topic of self-righteousness. And I'm just going to put this is a little caveat.
Caveat.
Thank you. When we think of the Pharisees, we think of people who were super holy and were trying to follow the letter of the law, and they thought they were working their way into the kingdom. But what's the picture here? They were divorcing, they were loving money, they were living for themselves, they're being very wicked. And so I think it's important to remember this is the picture of the Pharisees, because sometimes the Pharisees are held up as these paragons of virtue, and yet they just missed this getting saved part. But I think they're actually very much not understanding their Bibles very well. You're going to jump in on the caveat. Ooh, this is good.
So we were talking off air. The divorce part in verse 18? Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. It seems like just this out in right field,
Left field. Come on.
I like the other metaphor better. It's out in right field.
It's not even another metaphor.
Well, I'll make it one. And whoever marries her who is divorced from her husband commits adultery. It's like this made up, it's like this thing that doesn't fit the context. But really, a lot of times, there was a financial component to marriage and divorce. There's a dowry associated with marriage. And if a woman messed up in the law in some way, then she could lose her dowry And so it's probably mentioning divorce here because the Pharisees would be able to profit off of the wife in some way, or to be able to discard her so that she's not a liability. So it probably has even just a financial component to it there in verse 18. So I think that it does kind of fit that context. I haven't studied that out extensively, but at least divorce in the ancient Near Eastern world, there was a lot of finances associated with it.
All right, so end caveat. So back to the passage. I think it really is aiming at the Pharisees and their self-righteousness. I think you've proved that. I'm totally convinced. And so when I think through the passage now, what I'm convinced of is the main point, the main intention, you might say, that Luke is having. I would agree it is to aim at self-righteous people who think they're going to heaven and they're not worrying about it. So then I think is the question you're asking, if I, a saved Christian, loving the Lord, come to this passage and say, oh man, I love money, this passage means I need to not love money. Is that wrong? Is that a misinterpretation of the passage?
Well,
I think I can answer, but you go ahead.
Well, so, and this is
Because
thinking,
most people are going to read this and say, oh, I should use my money differently.
yeah. So
Is that okay?
I think
that's
the
okay.
heart of it, and I know Tim has some thoughts here too that he wants to jump in on. But when you get to that verse where it says, and this is Jesus, I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth. A lot of commentaries interact with that phrase. What does it mean for a disciple to make friends with their unrighteous wealth? And it talks about giving, and it talks about, not a lot of different things there. But again, the end of that verse, I think, indicates that Jesus is not talking about earth at all.
Yes.
But I do think, so on both sides of the divide of Pentecost, there are commands. Love God and love your neighbor. And so the law doesn't go, the law of loving God first doesn't go away. So how high do you have to abstract the parable? I don't think it's wrong for a Christian to say, I should love God, and if I love my money more, that's a problem.
Mhm.
So I think that's right on.
And I think you can get that from this passage
Yeah,
because maybe the main target is to say this about self-righteousness, but what are you learning about self-righteousness? One of the centers of it is you're not loving God, you're loving something else. So I think as a regenerate Christian, you're looking at this. Maybe that's not the main point of the passage, but it's, I think, a principle that's true, and you can carry that over into my life. Even though I'm not a Pharisee and I'm not a law breaker in this sense, I can say that does apply to me because it's unrighteous to do that, and I should be putting off those things. And also, I think about the Holy Spirit. You read this, I'm not the Pharisee, but my heart has been turning to the love of something else. And then I see the unbelievers who think they're saved, that's what Jesus condemns them for. It's almost an argument from the lesser to the greater. I mean, if an unsaved person, if this is like a sin, and they should see it as an issue, I think that applies legitimately to us as New Testament Christians.
And then here's a thought too, is the way that I, as a Christian, in the way that I give, and that includes why I'm giving, what I'm giving to, what I'm loving, all of those inside parts of the external action, is the way that I'm giving, does that affect eternal reward? And in the parable, it's not talking about rewards in the sense of like a Christian being rewarded for his service. It's talking about eternal dwelling, salvation, I think is the point. But is the way or the ways that I give as a Christian, will that impact something in the future? The principle, the shrewd steward, he's carefully thinking about his future. Are there ways that a Christian can carefully think about their future and the way that they think in their perspective of eternity? Would that change the way they're using their money now? And the answer is absolutely yes. And I know Tim wants to talk about that. So.
I just wish we had maybe an illustration of this. Maybe if there's like a rich man and he had a lot of money, and then maybe if there's like a poor beggar that sat out at his gate and didn't have anything, and he just kind of ate the scraps off of the rich man's floor, and the dog kind of licked his sores or something. And then we'd have that illustration of this rich man not getting to heaven or something because, he was a lover of money and not a lover of God and being generous with his money and giving it to the poor man.
Man,
We just had an illustration like that or
that was
something.
really vivid. You just came up with that on the fly? That is really good.
So, interestingly enough, right after the end of this section, verse 18, another story is told in Luke 16 about a rich man and Lazarus. And there's debate as to whether it's a parable or not. I do not think it's a parable. I think it's a real story.
I think it is a parable, but that's okay. We don't need to fight about that here.
That'll be a future podcast.
And there'd be reasons why you think it's a parable, why you don't think it's a parable. But but the point of that parable is, again, I think it's eternal dwelling.
Right, it is.
Because there's a rich man who is rich. He's really comfortable in the earthly life, but then he dies and he's in torment, everlasting torment, and he can't get to the place of blessing where Lazarus is. He wants to go back and warn his family, hey, don't love money, love God so you can go there. And so it's again speaking to just a lot of stories about the peril of riches and how the love of money can keep someone from loving God. And not as if it's a unique thing, but yeah, Tim.
So I would just really even encourage our listener to examine your checkbook and to think through checkbook. Is that like so old fashioned?
Do people have checkbooks
I know.
anymore?
Your Apple
it's a
Wallet.
metaphor. Take a look at your bank account and look at your credit card and all the expenses that you're spending and all of that. All right, and think to yourself, okay, how generous am I? And when you see a need, all right, don't ask the person, hey, do you need a little bit of money? Don't do that. Okay, somebody actually helped me with this like 5 years ago. He was like, when you think there's even a need, okay, don't ask. If God's placed a burden upon your heart, just go and give. Just give the money, all right? God's blessed you. He'll take care of you. Give. And secondly, don't be cheap, okay? I think it's kind of interesting in the story. The manager, he halves the one, all right? I mean, that's a lot. I mean, a lot.
That's a big loss.
It's a big loss. And I think that you should consider, God's given you, he's blessed you with a lot of money. Give a lot of money. Give it away. I mean, the government's just going to keep printing more anyway, so it's going to be worth less tomorrow. So get rid of it now. And then not every time do you have a big donation. Okay, sometimes it might be a little bit littler donation. And I personally think that's the analogy with the half and then the 20%. You have the 50-50 and then you have the 80-20. It's going to be varying amounts. But you look, you assess a need, and then you ask the Lord, hey, you know what? How much should I be generous? This is what, you don't care about money. You're a lover of God. Give your money. Don't spend the money on your own pleasures, comforts, luxury. All right? Think through the rich man and Lazarus. Instead, be generous with those funds and give it to those who are in need.
If an unrighteous person can understand, I need to cut like half of this off the bill, shouldn't a righteous person be able to do better or at least equal? Is that a wrong application or thought there?
Well, I think so.
Are we in the weeds on the wrong part?
To use a common phrase, and the quote is, "Don't make a parable stand on all fours." And I think you need to cut some legs off that parable, Tim. But because I don't think there's a spiritual meaning to the amounts. I think the principle is that he's giving these guys a reduction so that they're friendly to him later. I don't think the amount is significant, but I don't think you could draw out, so sometimes you do 50% and sometimes you do 20%.
Right, I wouldn't say it's like 50 or 20, but I would say that it's generous. I think it's interesting that it's half and then even a 20%, like he's giving a lot.
Well, I think that's a true principle, but I don't think that's what it's saying because he's not giving it.
Yeah, it's not.
He's
his
taking
money.
it from his master.
Now, if we're talking about thievery, I think we got some good principles on thieving here.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
think so.
We've got some great.
Bank
that
robbers,
actually be a
listen
really
up.
great way to preach it. It's like, hey, if you want to steal from someone, here's a great way to do it. But so
who do you work for? How much do you think you can embezzle?
yeah, there's
Horrendous.
I feel like
This was like
I feel like I mentioned The Office too many times. I don't watch it anymore, but there's an episode on there where there's one I think it's called The Convict, and there's a guy who comes to work at the branch, and he was doing insider trading, and he went to prison, and so there's a great character that develops in that episode, Prison Mike, and but there's Kevin, this big like oaf of a man in the office, and he's like, yeah, I had him explain to me what insider trading was 3 times because that sounds a lot like what I do every day. And they just never come back to it. But it's super funny. So okay, I want to end with one thought. It's incredibly difficult to take an obscure parable and bring it into modern relevance. Especially we easily moralize or principalize passages like this because understanding its intent to the original audience is sometimes obscure and difficult. We read a parable about money and we're like, oh, it's about money. So it's about how I spend my money, which I think that's a secondary application. But I think the primary application is, and why Luke is recording this, is it's one of many interchanges where Jesus is trying to tell the difference between someone who is going to the kingdom or heaven and who's not. And it gets into, do you really love God, or are you just self-righteous and you love yourself? But one of the ways we can connect that is, as a Christian, we are told how to give. And it's never an amount. It's a manner. To be a cheerful giver. I have 2 things I want to say about this, and then we can close. First is that I have my phone set up so that whenever something is drawn from my bank account, I get a notification. And it doesn't matter what that is. Literally this morning, I got a notification that my DirecTV for my NFL pass was paid today. And I actually was going to cancel it because I was like, I don't need to pay for this, but I do like watching football, so, whatever. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, I hate that. Why am I paying for that? I hated giving money for something that I love. So how much more difficult is it to truly give to someone where you're getting nothing in return in an earthly way? Like there's nothing I'm getting from this other than to be joyful in giving to my church or to someone who has need. And that is hard for people to do. That's incredibly hard for people to do. But for the grace of God and the Spirit of God, none of us can do that. But we do need to be looking in our hearts and asking ourselves, okay, yeah, I probably give. Maybe I don't give at all. Well, start there. Like you should be giving. What's interesting is the setup in the parable is this guy trying to make sure he's secure. Most of our churches have a setup where people can give so that when people are in need, there's money for that, like a benevolence fund or a deacon's fund or something like that. And the church in Acts is like they're sharing everything. So within your church, you should feel secure. If you need help, there's probably something there for you. But then the other side of that is that's because people are giving within the church so that needs are met. But I think we can give and we cannot do it the right way because our manner is wrong. It's like we're not happy to meet other people's needs, and we should. And so if you struggle with that, that's an area where you need to be aware of that, the tug of the pull of money, and you need to repent and be willing to give cheerfully.
And be free.
Yeah, to be free of the bondage of that.
Yeah.
And the other is a story. I think I've mentioned this before, but my dad was a farmer, and we don't have a lot of possessions relating to the farm, but there is, land in Iowa is a hot commodity. And for most of my dad's life, he was not a believer. He got saved in his 60s, and he watched portions of the farm back in the 70s and 80s get claimed by the bank and sold to other people. Like it was hard for farmers in the 80s, and he watched land get taken and sold, and for most of his life, never really had a lot in the bank account. Farming's not a lucrative business unless you can really, really have a huge enterprise. Small farms can't really make a lot of money now. And he was pretty, I'll use a very savvy financial term. He was pretty grubby. And I think I got some of my stinginess from him, even just the way that he was careful about how he paid for things. It's interesting when he got saved, how that changed. And I can remember when having some conversations with him regarding farm expenses and farm income and the change in his language from my farm to my money, from my farm, my money to, wow, look what God has given us. Look how God has blessed us.
Amen.
Amen.
And that should be the initial and ongoing change that's taking place in our hearts as it regards money. And so I think we take a primary application from the parable. You know, you might love money because you're not redeemed and you think you are, and you're unrighteous and you need to be forgiven, and great, Jesus does that. If you are a Christian and you're wanting to, not be a lover of money, but a servant of God, how do you do that? Think about the way you give. Think about how you give. Do you love meeting other people's needs, or are you really content to serve yourself with money? And we'll just end with this. Money is a great servant, but it's a horrible master. So don't live your life for it. Love God, not money, because you cannot serve two masters. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thinklings podcast. We would love to hear from you. If you have any feedback, suggestions, or potential topics that you'd like us to discuss, you can contact us through our email, thinklingspodcast@gmail.com. Remember, don't let this conversation end with this podcast. Read good books, talk about them with your friends, and always continue to cultivate your mind. See you next time on the Thinklings podcast.